What kind of woman walks alone toward a remote ranch on the first morning of the new year, when the cold is sharp enough to split skin and silence stretches for miles, carrying nothing but exhaustion in her eyes and fear in the way she keeps glancing over her shoulder? Jack Callahan had lived most of his adult life believing he understood solitude. He owned more land than anyone else in 3 counties, a spread of high desert and winter grass that rolled toward the horizon like a frozen sea. His wealth was old money earned the hard way: cattle, water rights, contracts signed with steady hands and unflinching patience. People in town spoke his name with a mix of respect and distance, not only because of his fortune, but because Jack Callahan kept to himself. Since the accident that had taken his right eye years earlier, he had learned to favor silence. It was easier than explaining the scar, easier than answering questions about the night a horse spooked, a rifle misfired, and a single moment changed the way he saw the world, literally and otherwise. That morning, the ranch lay half buried under the aftermath of a violent winter storm. Fences were down, the western guest cabins damaged, tin roofing twisted like paper. Jack stood near the corral, his coat pulled tight, the wind biting at the exposed skin around his scarred eye, when he noticed movement at the far gate. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, snow lifting and falling in sheets. Then the shape resolved into a woman walking steadily toward him, her head down, boots worn thin, her posture rigid as if she expected to be turned away before she ever spoke. Emily Brooks stopped several feet from the gate. She did not wave. She did not smile. She stood there as though bracing herself for impact, her hands rough and red from cold, fingers scarred and cracked. Her jacket was too thin for January, patched at the elbows, and her face carried the kind of tiredness that sleep alone could never fix. When she finally lifted her eyes to meet Jack's, there was no plea in them, only resolve sharpened by desperation. She asked for work, not money, not help, work. Jack studied her longer than politeness required. He noticed the way her gaze kept drifting toward the road behind her, the way her shoulders tightened every time the wind carried a distant sound. She spoke clearly, evenly, explaining she could clean, repair, haul debris, whatever was needed. When he told her he paid by the hour, she nodded once. When he added the rate, fair and unnegotiated, she agreed immediately. Only when he offered her coffee did she hesitate, then shake her head, as if accepting even that small kindness carried a price she could not afford. He put her to work on the damaged western cabin. Over the next few days, Jack watched from a distance as Emily worked through cold mornings and short afternoons, her movements quick, efficient, never wasted. She scrubbed soot from walls, replaced broken boards, hauled ruined furniture out into the snow without complaint. She barely stopped to eat. When Jack left food nearby, sandwiches, soup in a thermos, she ignored it at first, then, after hours of labor, accepted it silently, as though conceding to necessity rather than generosity. There was something in her discipline that unsettled him. She worked like someone racing an invisible clock. When the sun dipped low, she packed her tools without delay and left, always heading toward the hills instead of the town road. Jack noticed that pattern quickly. By the 3rd evening, curiosity gave way to concern. By the 5th, concern hardened into suspicion. On the 7th night, as dusk bled into shadow, Jack followed her. He kept his distance, using the land the way he always had, moving quietly, unseen. Emily walked fast despite the cold, cutting along a narrow trail that disappeared into the foothills. The cabin she led him to sat hidden among trees, barely standing, its roof sagging under the weight of old snow. No lights, no smoke, just darkness and the sound of a door opening, then the soft, unmistakable voices of children. Jack stayed back, heart heavy as realization set in. Through a cracked window, he saw 4 small figures huddled close together, sharing a single blanket. Emily moved among them with practiced efficiency, distributing food sparingly, brushing hair from tired faces, pressing her forehead briefly to each child's in a gesture that spoke of love sharpened by fear. This was not a woman running for herself. This was a mother calculating survival day by day, mistake by mistake. He left without making his presence known, the cold suddenly less biting than the weight settling in his chest. The next morning, nothing was said. Jack did not confront her. He did not offer sympathy. Instead, he handed her a longer list of work and told her he needed help inside the main house and stables as well. He increased her hours. He adjusted the schedule so she could leave earlier if needed. When she looked at him, suspicion flickering across her face, he kept his expression neutral. This was work, nothing more. Slowly, something shifted. Emily began accepting food without refusal. A blanket appeared in her arms one evening, then vitamins tucked discreetly into her bag. Jack never mentioned them. Neither did she. The children, unseen but always present in the quiet calculation of her choices, began spending afternoons in the warmth of the ranch house, their voices echoing softly through halls that had been empty for years. Yet beneath the fragile routine, tension coiled. Emily never relaxed fully. Her eyes still tracked the road. Her body still braced for impact. And Jack, one-eyed and watchful, understood instinctively that the past had not finished with her yet. Whatever she had fled was not the kind of danger that faded quietly into memory. It lingered. It waited. As winter pressed on and the new year stretched ahead, the ranch, once a monument to solitude, became something else entirely. A place where silence carried meaning, where trust was measured in work done and words unspoken, and where two damaged lives, bound by circumstance and restraint, stood unknowingly at the edge of a storm far more violent than any winter could bring. The knowledge Jack Callahan carried after that night did not sit quietly. It moved with him through the ranch like a second shadow, heavier than the one cast by his body, heavier even than the missing eye that had taught him how much a man could lose and still stand upright. He did not sleep much after following Emily into the hills. When he did, he dreamed of thin walls, of children's breathing in the dark, of a woman measuring every step as if the wrong one could collapse the ground beneath her feet. Morning came hard and cold. Emily arrived before dawn as she always did, her face set, her hair pulled back with efficient care. She did not know that the balance between them had already shifted. She greeted Jack with the same reserved nod, took the list of tasks he handed her, and went to work as if nothing in the world existed beyond what was directly in front of her hands. Jack watched her more closely now, not with suspicion, but with something like respect edged by unease. He noticed how she counted time without looking at a clock, how she conserved strength, how every movement served a purpose. This was not poverty learned recently. This was survival refined over years. When she paused to stretch her back or wipe sweat from her forehead despite the cold, Jack saw strain she never allowed to show in her voice. He gave her work inside the main house that day, not as a test, but as an opening. The house had been quiet for too long. Dust lay thick in unused rooms. Emily moved through them with care, as if she understood the weight of empty space. She cleaned thoroughly but never intrusively, leaving personal items exactly where they were, respecting boundaries Jack had not realized he still guarded. At midday, he left soup on the counter without comment and walked out. When he returned an hour later, the bowl was empty, washed and placed neatly upside down on a towel. No thanks, no acknowledgement, just acceptance. It was enough. The snow began falling again that afternoon, thick and relentless. Emily worked through it anyway, finishing repairs on the stable door with numb fingers. Jack found himself calculating distances without meaning to. The miles from the cabin to the ranch, the temperature dropping fast, the impossibility of warmth without steady shelter. He understood then how carefully she had weighed every choice, how much pride she had swallowed to stand at his gate that first morning. That evening he drove out toward the foothills without waiting for darkness to hide him. He stopped short of the cabin this time, leaving supplies near the tree line where they could be found without confrontation. Blankets, food that would last, fuel. He did not knock. He did not announce himself. This was not rescue. It was acknowledgement. Emily noticed the supplies immediately when she returned. Jack could tell by the way she froze the next morning when she arrived at the ranch, tension visible in the line of her jaw. She worked in silence for hours before finally speaking. "You followed me," she said, not accusing, not asking. Jack met her gaze evenly. "I needed to know." There it was, the fragile line between offense and understanding. Emily exhaled slowly, as if releasing something she had been holding for years. She did not explain herself. She did not apologize. She simply nodded once, the gesture heavy with implication. "They're mine," she said quietly. "I take care of them." "I know," Jack replied. That was all. No promises, no lectures, no offers she would be forced to refuse. From that moment on, something fundamental changed. Emily brought the children to the ranch on afternoons when the cold grew too severe. At first, they stayed near the kitchen, small and watchful, uncertain of their welcome. Jack kept his distance, allowing familiarity to grow naturally. He watched them warm their hands by the stove, heard laughter echo faintly down the hall, felt the house shift under the presence of life returning to its walls. He adjusted the work again, increasing her hours, raising her pay without explanation, assigning tasks that required skill rather than brute endurance. Bookkeeping, inventory, organization. Emily accepted each change with measured caution, but Jack saw relief flicker through her exhaustion. This was not charity, this was exchange, work for stability, dignity preserved. Still, danger hovered just beyond reach. Emily's eyes never stopped scanning the horizon, the children startled at unfamiliar sounds. Nights grew tense as snow piled high against doors and windows, cutting the world off from easy escape. Jack understood that isolation could protect as much as it could imprison. The truth surfaced gradually, not in a single confession, but in fragments carried on exhaustion and trust. Emily spoke of rules disguised as love, of obedience mistaken for faith, of a husband who had learned to control without leaving visible marks. She did not linger on details. She did not dramatize pain. The simplicity of her words made them heavier. "He won't stop," she said once, staring out at the snow-covered pasture. "Men like him never do." Jack believed her without question. He had seen enough violence in his life to recognize patterns. He did not tell her everything he was preparing. He did not need to. His actions would speak soon enough. What stood between them now was not fear, but choice. Jack could pretend none of this was his concern, could keep the arrangement strictly professional, and send her back to that cabin each night until winter broke or something else did. Or he could accept the truth he already knew, that some lines, once crossed, could not be uncrossed without consequence. Emily, for her part, sensed the shift. She watched Jack with new awareness, weighing his silences as carefully as his words. She did not ask for protection. She did not ask for refuge. What she asked for, without ever saying it aloud, was space to fight on her own terms. And Jack Callahan, standing in the doorway of a house no longer empty, understood that whatever came next would demand more than wealth or distance. It would require him to choose involvement, not as a savior, but as a man willing to stand where neutrality was no longer an option. The storm outside showed no sign of ending. Neither did the one gathering beyond the snow. By midwinter, work had become the language through which Jack and Emily spoke most clearly. It set the rhythm of their days, measured trust in completed tasks and quiet acknowledgments rather than promises. Emily arrived before dawn, left after sunset, and in between she kept the ranch running with a precision that surprised even Jack. She reorganized storage rooms that had not been touched in years, balanced accounts with careful handwriting, and learned the patterns of the land the way only someone who depended on it could. The children settled into the spaces she carved out for them, doing homework at the long kitchen table, reading by the fire, learning which corners of the house were theirs to occupy without fear of being sent away. Jack watched all of it with restraint. He did not hover. He did not offer praise that would feel like judgment. Instead, he made practical decisions. Another heater installed in the west wing, extra locks on doors, a routine for evenings that kept everyone close without confinement. He found himself adjusting his own habits without thinking, returning earlier, keeping lights on longer, listening for footsteps that were no longer only his. Trust did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, tested by silence and circumstance. Emily spoke more now, but never loosely. She shared enough to explain the tension in her shoulders, the way she startled at the sound of a truck engine, the reason she taught the children to keep their voices low, even when laughter felt earned. Jack did not press for details. He understood that names carried power, and some truths were not ready to be spoken aloud. The first sign that the past had found them came quietly. A truck slowed near the ranch road one afternoon, lingering longer than necessary before moving on. The next day, a figure appeared near the property line and disappeared before Jack could confront him. Emily noticed both. Jack could tell by the way she stopped mid-sentence, by the way her hand tightened on the counter as if bracing against impact. She said nothing until the message arrived. It came late in the evening, her phone vibrating softly on the kitchen table. Emily looked at the screen and went pale, the color draining from her face as if the cold had finally reached inside. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply sat down, breath shallow, eyes fixed on words Jack did not need to read to understand. "He found me," she said. That was all it took. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with everything they had both been avoiding. Jack did not ask how. He did not ask when. Those questions could wait. What mattered was what came next. Emily stood and began gathering the children, her movements sharp and efficient, fear sharpening every instinct. Jack stopped her gently, his voice steady, his single eye fixed on her face. "You're not going back out there tonight," he said. She hesitated, pride flaring even in the middle of fear. "I can't stay because I'm scared." "You're staying because it's safer," Jack replied. "That's not the same thing." The line between them held. Emily nodded once, the decision made not because he insisted, but because she trusted him enough to hear reason through panic. That night, the children slept under a roof that did not creak with every gust of wind, and Emily stayed awake until dawn, sitting in a chair near their beds, a quiet sentinel guarding what little piece she had carved out of chaos. The name came the next morning, spoken flatly, without drama. Her husband, a man who believed ownership and love were the same thing, a man who had never forgiven her for leaving, who considered her defiance a theft that demanded repayment. Jack listened without interruption, absorbing the implications. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. He moved quickly but carefully. He called his lawyer, asked questions without embellishment, laid out facts as he understood them. He spoke to his foreman about increased security, not as a reaction, but as preparation. Gates were checked, cameras installed, routines adjusted. Nothing overt. Nothing that would make Emily feel trapped by protection she had not asked for. Still, confrontation found them anyway. The man came late one afternoon, just before dusk, his truck stopping at the gate as if daring someone to challenge him. Jack saw him from the house and stepped outside without hesitation. Emily watched from the window, every muscle in her body coiled tight. The man's voice carried across the distance, slurred with anger, entitlement etched into every word. He accused. He demanded. He spoke of rights that had long ago dissolved under his own failures. Jack did not raise his voice. He stood still, a solid presence that did not retreat or escalate. "This isn't your place anymore," Jack said calmly. "You don't get to decide what happens here." The man laughed, bitter and sharp. "You think money makes you untouchable?" "No," Jack replied. "I think consequences do." The standoff ended without violence, but not without promise. As the truck pulled away, Jack knew this was only the beginning. The kind of man who had already lost control would not walk away quietly. The days that followed were strained. Emily moved through her work with renewed urgency, her calm stretched thin by constant vigilance. Jack stayed close without crowding her, aware that too much attention could feel as dangerous as neglect. The children sensed the tension, their play quieter now, their eyes tracking every unfamiliar sound. Then the threats escalated. Accusations spread through town. Rumors took shape at the school gates, whispered by people who preferred easy narratives to complicated truths. The man painted himself as a victim, a father denied his children by manipulation and wealth. Emily endured it silently until one afternoon, when her oldest stood up in front of everyone and spoke the truth without flinching. That moment changed everything. Public sympathy shifted. Questions were asked. Lines were drawn. What had been a private struggle became an open conflict, one that would not be resolved by silence or distance. Jack understood then that quiet survival was no longer enough. The threat had crossed into daylight, and once that happened, there could be no return to the fragile anonymity that had protected them before. Whatever came next would demand strength measured not in endurance, but in resolve. The legal battle began the way most wars do, quietly and with paperwork, but its weight pressed down on every corner of the ranch. Filings were prepared, signatures collected, timelines reconstructed with painful precision. Emily sat at the long table with Jack and his attorneys, hands folded tightly in her lap, listening as years of her life were reduced to evidence and affidavits. Dates mattered now. Bruises that had faded did not. Fear had to be translated into language a judge would accept. Jack watched her endure it without complaint, her posture straight, her voice steady, even when the questions cut close to bone. The hearing itself arrived faster than either of them expected. The courthouse was crowded, the air thick with judgment disguised as curiosity. The man who had once ruled Emily's life stood across the room, dressed carefully, playing the role of the wronged father with practiced ease. He spoke loudly about rights and family, about betrayal and manipulation, about how wealth could buy silence and loyalty. Emily did not respond in kind. She told the truth plainly. She spoke of control masked as love, of children taught to be quiet because noise invited punishment, of nights spent calculating how to leave without being followed. When her oldest child testified, voice steady despite trembling hands, the room shifted. Lies collapse fastest when faced with those who survived them. The ruling did not come immediately, but the tone was unmistakable. Temporary orders were issued. Supervised visitation only, distance enforced. Emily exhaled for the first time in weeks, though Jack knew relief like that was fragile. Men who lost control rarely accepted boundaries imposed by law. Retaliation came swiftly. The call woke them both in the early hours of the morning. Fire. The cabin in the foothills, the place that had once represented both refuge and fear, was burning. By the time they arrived, there was nothing left but blackened beams and smoke curling into the winter sky. Emily stood motionless, the children pressed against her, watching as the last physical remnant of their old life collapsed into ash. Jack felt anger settle into him, cold and precise. This was not loss meant to intimidate. It was a message. Law enforcement took statements. Accelerants were found. A threat was spray-painted on a nearby structure at the ranch later that day, crude and unmistakable. The case shifted from family court to criminal investigation, but even then, the wheels turned slowly. Jack knew better than to trust timing to justice alone. Security increased. Patrols were set. Lights burned through the night. Emily slept lightly, always listening, a habit learned too well to break. Jack stayed close, not hovering, but present, a quiet assurance that she was no longer standing alone. The intrusion came on a night when the wind was high and the world beyond the ranch felt distant and unreal. The alarm sounded first, sharp and insistent. Jack was on his feet instantly. Emily reached for the phone, then stopped, hearing footsteps where no one should have been. The man was inside. Everything after happened fast and slow, all at once. Shouts, a crash, fear distilled into clarity. Emily did not hesitate. She moved the children where Jack had taught her, then turned back, hands steady as she lifted the shotgun kept for emergencies they had hoped would never come. The man lunged, fury stripped bare. Emily fired. The sound echoed through the house, deafening and final. He fell, wounded but alive, rage dissolving into shock. Sirens followed soon after, light slicing through the dark. Jack stood between Emily and the scene, grounding her as reality rushed back in. Arrest followed swiftly, charges stacked high enough to crush any remaining illusion of innocence. The trial moved quickly now, momentum driven by evidence too heavy to ignore. The arson, the threats, the break-in. The intent was clear. When the sentence was handed down, years measured in decades, parental rights severed permanently, Emily closed her eyes and breathed as if surfacing from deep water. The danger receded slowly, like a storm moving off into the distance. But its imprint remained. Healing did not arrive with verdicts. It came in quieter moments. In the way the children slept through the night without waking, in the way Emily's shoulders finally relaxed. In the way Jack realized the ranch no longer felt like a fortress, but a home shaped by shared survival. Nothing about what they had endured felt heroic. There was no triumph in violence, no satisfaction in watching a man destroy himself. What remained was consequence, unavoidable and final, and the knowledge that choosing to stand had changed them all. The fire had taken the past with it. What stood now was something different, something built deliberately from the wreckage. When the danger finally loosened its grip, it did not disappear all at once. It retreated slowly, like a wounded animal dragged back into the dark, leaving behind scars that would never fully fade. The ranch settled into a quieter rhythm, but no one pretended that silence meant forgetting. Emily learned that safety was not the absence of fear, but the ability to breathe through it without running. Jack learned that protection was not about force or wealth, but about staying present long after the threat was gone. Spring came cautiously. Snow melted into mud, then into green, and the land seemed to stretch after months of holding its breath. The children changed first. They laughed louder. They slept deeper. They stopped flinching at every unexpected sound. Emily noticed these shifts the way a mother notices everything, with relief braided tightly with grief for how long it had taken to reach this point. Some nights, she still woke before dawn, heart racing, listening for footsteps that never came. Jack would hear her moving in the dark and remain still, letting her know she was not alone without forcing her to speak. They did not rush what came next. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic promises spoken in the aftermath of trauma. Love grew quietly between them, rooted in shared endurance and mutual respect. Jack never positioned himself as the man who had saved her. Emily never saw him as an escape. What bound them was choice, made daily, deliberately, without illusion. He admired her strength without trying to tame it. She trusted his steadiness without surrendering herself. The decision to marry came on an ordinary morning. Coffee cooling on the counter, sunlight slipping through open windows. Jack spoke simply, acknowledging the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Emily answered just as plainly. Yes did not mean perfection. It meant commitment. The ceremony was small. A judge, a handful of witnesses, 4 children standing close, not as accessories to the moment, but as its center. Jack wore the same quiet expression he had worn the day he first watched Emily walk through his gate. Only now it carried something softer, something earned. When he signed the adoption papers weeks later, his hand did not shake. He understood exactly what he was choosing. Emily watched him with an emotion she could not name, something beyond gratitude, beyond love. This was not rescue. This was partnership made permanent by action, not words. On the anniversary of the fire, they returned to the empty ground where the cabin had once stood. Nothing had been rebuilt there. Instead, wildflowers grew, uneven and stubborn, breaking through soil that had known only ash. The children ran ahead, scattering seeds, laughing as the wind carried them where it would. Emily stood beside Jack, fingers laced with his, feeling the quiet truth settle into place. Their family had not been formed by blood alone, nor by tragedy, nor even by love in its simplest sense. It had been built through endurance, through respect, through the courage to stay when leaving would have been easier. The past remained part of them, but it no longer defined their future. As the sun dipped low and the land glowed gold, Jack felt something he had not felt in years. Completion, not as an ending, but as a beginning chosen freely, one day at a time. In the end, their story was never about a wealthy cowboy or a woman who had suffered too much. It was about choice, repeated quietly, long after the danger passed and the world stopped watching. Healing did not arrive with applause or certainty. It arrived in ordinary moments, in shared meals, in doors left unlocked without fear, in children who no longer asked where they would sleep next. Jack Callahan did not become whole by finding love. He became whole by opening space for it, by letting others change the shape of his solitude without losing himself. Emily did not find safety by being protected. She found it by standing in partnership, her strength acknowledged rather than replaced. Together they built something that could hold the weight of memory without breaking under it. The wildflowers on the empty land would bloom each year, then fade, then return again, indifferent to the past yet rooted in it. And so with this family, imperfect, resilient, chosen, not rescued, not saved, simply built, piece by piece, through loyalty, patience, and the quiet courage to believe that even after fire, something living could still grow. End of article. Good night.